Hello everyone, my name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown. Generally speaking, most of the comics that I cover on the show are very all ages appropriate, as most comic companies want their books to sell to as wide an audience as potentially possible. But sometimes I come across a book that is definitely aimed at a much more adult, mature audience, as is the case with our next two episodes. While I break down the comic book Typhoid, I will be discussing topics of self-harm, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, sex workers, and murder quite frequently. They are critical parts of the storyline, and talking about the comic simply can't be done without addressing the fact that these topics are brought up in the book. If that is not your thing, that's perfectly fine. Feel free to watch something else. If that does not scare you off, or if you're still interested, by all means, proceed. Let's get to the show. In a sleazy motel in New York City, we see a beautiful young woman in a red-lit room. We get several panels focusing on her lips, her eyeshadow, and the gun in someone's hand. As the gun is put in her mouth, there are dialogue balloons scattered across the page. Someone is being asked why they do it. They answer, because bullets are heavy. Guns without bullets are lighter. They do it in order to lighten the load. We then move to a man standing in front of a projection screen. He's middle-aged with a small black goatee. He holds up a strip of undeveloped film in front of his eyes, trying to find something specific. As he does so, he's talking to himself. "It's here. I know it's here. I shot it. I know I shot it. The proof that I'm innocent is here." We then move to a kitchen. A woman stands over a sink wearing a dress and scrubbing in bubbly water. We see a close-up of her eye, and inside of her eye is a heart. She admonishes her child for bringing home dirty money, which is what she is scrubbing. We move again, observing a row of mailboxes. A hand opens one of them and pulls out a postcard with a pin-up girl on it. Red paint is splashed across the front and back of the card. A hastily scrawled note from the sender says that they wish you were here, but we can't make out who the author is. Again we move, this time to a mental institution. Inside of a padded cell is a young woman, probably in her 20s or maybe early 30s. She is wearing a straitjacket. Half of her face is painted, the right half the color white. A metal ring circles her head, and what I'm assuming are electrical leads connected to the ceiling. Taped to the wall behind her are scribbled notes, torn and reassembled. They introduce us to a pretty little girl who poisoned everything she touched. Some call her Mary. Some called her Typhoid. Every time she let out a sweet breath, someone else died. She was sweet. She was toxic. She was typhoid. The woman smiles at the camera. "Hiya, stranger. You must be one of those friends I haven't met yet." "What's that you say? Oh, you want to meet the others? Okay, sure, I can do that. Whatever blows your dress up." Suddenly, the white face paint on her face disappears. The woman's entire demeanor changes, even her hairstyle changes with that contraption on her head. This other personality blinks and asks where she is? "Oh, God, no, please, not again." And then the previous personality returns. "That was boring, little Virgin Mary," she says. "I'm Typhoid. The third one in here, you can't bring her home to mommy. She makes me look like a Girl Scout." The woman changes again, but this time when it happens, it's much more violent. Her whole body shakes. The notes on the wall explode into the air around her. When she's done, this personality doesn't introduce herself. She doesn't talk to men. The camera now moves up above the room, and we see that she is actually alone in the room. A smiley face adorns the poster across from her, and later on we'll see that under the smiley face is a phrase, that every stranger is a friend that you just haven't met yet. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 23.1 of Typhoid, Marvel's baddest bad girl. As someone who has been reading Marvel Comics for almost 30 years, and who has collected more than 30 years worth of their publications, it is rare for me to find a character that I don't know at least the basics for. But Typhoid Mary is a character who has always been a mystery to me. Oh, I've read comics that she's appeared in, sure. I remember her showing up in Deadpool's first ongoing series in like 97 or 98, issues 6, 7, and 8. Although I don't remember a goddamn thing about those comics otherwise. Other than Ed McGuinness's bombastic pencils. I bought those issues of Deadpool for the penciling more than the writing. They did not survive, but God, I love Ed McGuinness's stuff. I remember Mary showing up as the masked, mysterious Mutant Zero in Avengers The Initiative, but I especially remember not being very impressed when her true identity was finally revealed. At the time, Jean Grey was dead over in the X-Men books, and Marvel was definitely being like, hey, we got a telekinetic redhead in this book. X-fans, you should check it out. And like, I didn't personally think that they would bring back Jean Grey in an Avengers comic as opposed to an X-Men comic, but I do have to admit that I was still pretty underwhelmed when it was revealed to be Typhoid. Typhoid Mary has always been a weird question mark of a character to me. I knew that she came from Daredevil's corner of the Marvel Universe, a corner of the Marvel Universe that has never really spoken to me or connected with me. She's got a particularly weird look with this bushy mane of red hair, her face is half painted in white, and her outfit is generally like sex gear or bondage equipment most of the time. In Avengers The Initiative, once she ditched the Mutant Zero cover identity, she just wore like a leather jacket over a leather harness top that did nothing to hide her bare breasts. Like, the only reason that they were covered is because the artist made sure to draw that jacket as, like, very carefully positioned. And, like, I know that comics are aimed at a primarily male audience, and sometimes they really do like to flaunt the sexy ladies, but, like, good God, man. They weren't even trying to be classy with Mary. And, weirdly enough, Mary was also a mutant, which just threw me off even more. I love the mutants of the Marvel Universe. I grew up reading the X books, and I especially have a weird fascination with non-X-Men related mutants. I have bought Quicksilver comics, Scarlet Witch comics. I bought all of the New Warriors, largely for Firestar and Justice. I bought all of Cloak and Dagger. I've bought a lot of Namor, all because these are the mutants in the Marvel Universe who choose not to hang with the X-Men most of the time. And the X-Men are the coolest characters in Marvel's catalog. I don't care what anybody says. And all of these folks don't want to be a part of that? Why not, nerds? So Mary is a character that never spoke to me. If anything, when she showed up in a book that I was reading, I generally kind of rolled my eyes and just trudged ahead, patiently waiting for her to leave and for the book to refocus on whatever was important to begin with. So when I stumbled upon Mary's 4-issue miniseries from 1995, a part of Marvel's short-lived Edge imprint, I gladly scooped it up. Here was a chance for me to meet Mary in her element, to scope out exactly what her deal was, and maybe figure out why I never clicked with her. Marvel Edge was a short-lived imprint running from 1995 to 1996. Think of it as the prototype to the Marvel Max line, where Marvel attempted to publish darker, more adult titles. They had no idea what that really meant at the time, but they sure did try to figure it out. A handful of existing titles were absorbed into Edge, books like Doctor Strange and the Ghost Rider ongoing series, but there was also a handful of miniseries that were published as well, such as Spider-Man Punisher Family Plot, Doc Samson, Skrull Kill Crew, and, of course, Typhoid. Typhoid Mary was originally conceived of by author Ann Nocenti during a run on Daredevil in the 1980s. The kingpin of crime, Wilson Fisk, originally hired Mary Walker to make Matt Murdock fall in love with her so that she could kill him. This doomed, conflicted romance is really part of what has cemented Mary in Marvel Comics history. This is a character who is sexy, and she knows it, and she uses it as a weapon almost more than she uses any of her mutant powers. Nocenti returns to her creation for this particular 4-issue miniseries, so again, that was even more incentive for me to read this. After all, this isn't just a nice, quick story to just get to know the character or experience a one-off adventure. This is a chance to get to meet the character with the person who originally envisioned them. This isn't a 6 degrees of separation thing with 60 years of character growth and publication history where Mary has changed and evolved over time, making her a stranger to that original 1980s concept. No. This book is as Typhoid Mary as we're gonna get. It should be the perfect introduction. Not that this opening scene does a good job of explaining anything. Going into this book blind with no idea what the story was supposed to be, I was super confused. I know now, in retrospect, and having read the entire miniseries a couple times, that Nocenti is showing us things that are happening now that are going to get referenced later on in the comic. We see a woman is murdered. A man looks for proof of his innocence. A mother wants to clean filthy things up. A postcard gets delivered. And we meet our leading lady. There is also an undercurrent of fairy tales to this story that I skipped in my introduction. The first page of this book is actually a parchment-looking page with a big red heart drawn on it, almost like it's crayon, with flowing, scrawled handwriting like a storybook. It asks, essentially, why the villains in fairy tales did the bad things they did. The book even titles this issue Typhoid: A Fairy Tale of Violence, which was almost the original title of this episode. This theme will get explored as the book goes on, which is why I wanted to make sure that I at least acknowledged it here at the beginning. Right now, we don't have any context for any of these opening scenes, so they are confusing and messy, and they really threw me for a loop. Honestly, until I sat down to do the breakdown, I'd forgotten that these opening scenes were here at all. Because of that, I would argue that the best part of the opening scenes is the one that focused on Mary. It doesn't go into much detail, again, but it does give us kind of the basics. Mary has DID, dissociative identity disorder, and she knows it. She can even choose which personality presents at any given time. We have the kind, virginal Mary, the sexy and dangerous Typhoid, and the super feminist Bloody. But when we're shown her, she is cycling through these personalities with no prompting, essentially talking to herself, because that room is empty. Right now, again, we have no context for what that means, although I do think that Nocenti explores it later on. We'll get something akin to an answer next episode. This scene is fascinating to me, and while I do think that it establishes Mary's DID well, it doesn't really explain that that is what's going on. It's meant to hook us, to draw us in, and author Nocenti wants us to be a little bit confused and a little bit asking questions, but largely intrigued by what is going on here. As the scene continues, we'll find out that this is actually security footage from the mental institution, which is being watched by 2 young men. They appear to be in their mid-20s, I'd guess, and they seem to be in love with Mary. But just for clarity's sake, let me give you the basics on the character Typhoid Mary, because this miniseries never will. Something happened to young Mary Walker, which may not be her real name, when she was very young, causing her personality to split as a defensive measure. Mary developed dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Her host personality appears to be Mary Walker, although she refers to herself as Walker. And in this state, she seems like a determined, kind, strong woman. She lives in suburbia, although the main story for this comic happens in New York City. So is she living in the suburbs of New York? I would assume so, but we're never told for a fact. Walker lives with her roommate, who is actually the alter personality called Mary, who presents as a very feminine artist. She likes to paint, she wears dresses and frilly clothing, and is often referred to as a virginal beauty. She does have a boyfriend who is named John, although we barely see him at all in this miniseries. He does not seem to know about her other personalities either, and when he points out the weird array of clothing that Mary has on her laundry line, and when he complains about her roommate, Walker, she warns him. When they first met, she told him that he would know everything there was to know about her, as long as he didn't ask her any questions. Her next alter is Typhoid. Just Typhoid, although the character is usually referred to as Typhoid Mary. Unlike the Mary personality, Typhoid is wild, bold, openly sexual, and willingly violent. She is extremely defensive of women in particular, and it's hinted that sexual abuse as a child is what's caused her split in personality. Typhoid seems to have the greatest control of their collective psionic powers, which include low-level telepathy, telekinesis, and pyrokinesis, or the ability to create flame with the mind. Even then, the powers tend to present almost more like a horror movie special effect than like a superpower. Typhoid can charm men using her telepathy, or if she's excited or particularly distracted, she'll levitate objects around her. When you see Typhoid Mary and she is dressed in leather with her face half white, that is how you know that Typhoid is the personality that is in control at the time. I'm not sure if the white face paint actually, manifests as part of her mutation, or if it's a clothing choice that she actually puts on white face paint, or if it's just like a visual flourish by the artist in order to indicate when Typhoid is present. The white face paint definitely comes and goes at a moment's notice, which makes me think that there's more going on here than just some liberally applied grease paint. The final alter is Bloody, who dresses in white bandages or cloth wrapped around her, like some kind of victim of an attack. She is extremely violent, sadistic, and she outwardly hates men. Bloody sees herself as a defender of women, and that women can do no wrong. Bloody does tend to tap into the telekinesis, at least more so than Mary does, drawing shards of metal or glass to herself to use as armor or as improvised weapons. When Typhoid gives way to Bloody in our opening sequence, the scraps of paper flying around her is a sign of Bloody instinctively kicking up a telekinetic force to knock away any potential predators around her. Bloody manifesting is almost a sign of final resort, like things have gotten so bad that you need to let the dog off the chain, and Bloody is the dog, generally speaking. If she manifests, it's probably because somebody's going to die. She is the last level of defense for Mary Walker. Interestingly, Walker and her alters are aware that all of these identities exist in one body. Her personalities seem to be able to control their freedom to some degree, choosing to let one or the others be the dominant personality at any given time. They do not share memories, though. They have to either leave notes for each other or just let the next personality clean up whatever mess they find themselves in. These notes, taped to the wall in Mary's padded cell, those are from one alter to the rest of them. I don't know how she wrote them and then taped them to the wall, given that she was in a straitjacket and her telekinesis doesn't really seem refined enough for writing with her mind. But whatever, so be it. So our two movie buffs that I mentioned, Quincy and the glasses-wearing Trent, are in love with Mary. She's sick. She's gorgeous. Dude, she's wicked and sexy. A poison goddess. A killer. She is the perfect woman. She is the virgin, the whore, and the killer all rolled into one. She will be perfect as Quincy's movie star. He is on a mission to make the best film ever conceived of. He wants to answer the primal question, what makes a murderer? Was she born this way? Did she have the murder gene? Did she watch too many violent movies as a child? Or did some suppressed event create the murderer within her? It'll be one part film verite and one part voyeur movie. They stop geeking out over Mary because the security footage suddenly switches to a new angle. An orderly has entered Mary's room, and all of those leads connecting to Typhoid's head suddenly pop off and disconnect. The straps securing her straitjacket break, too. She pins the orderly against the wall, pressing into him. Is he hungry? Oh, yes, he is, she answers. For this. And Typhoid touches him somewhere particularly sensitive. The man protests, but weakly. Oh, he is hungry for this. Does he want to be her friend? Before he can climax, Typhoid stabs the tubes and wires from her headset into the orderly's torso. Oh no, look at the mess he just made. Bad boy. She says goodbye to the stranger, and now we see the text on the poster on her wall. A stranger is just a friend that you haven't met yet. Goodbye, friend. Quincy and Trent are stoked at this scene. This is better than perfect. Oh! Quincy asks Trent to find her and get her for the movie. He can seduce anyone, so he is more than confident in Trent's skills. Trent agrees to do it, but he has spent time in hospitals too. He feels some kind of connection to Mary. He's not going to lie to her or trick her into doing this. The pair are interrupted by Quincy's mom, who walks into the space to demonstrate her latest catalog purchase, a computerized mouse. If that isn't impressive, keep in mind this book was published in 1995, and computers were not the household item that they are today. Quincy is really not impressed by her purchase. If anything, he's actually worried. His mother only orders stuff when she's upset, so what's wrong, Mummy? Mother, who wears a head shawl and glasses, even indoors, yes, asks if Quincy knows where his father is. Quincy does not. He is not his father's keeper, and he won't be her spy, Mummy. And what does it even matter where Dad goes? You've got the house to yourself, the credit cards. You know, Dad is discreet when it comes to the other women. Why can't she just leave it alone? Mother slaps him. What a horrible thing to say! Upset, and clearly spoiled, Quincy demands that she makes up this assault up to him. He's going to need lab equipment for his movie, Mummy, somewhere private and expensive. She assures him that he can use her credit cards. And this is one of those moments that perfectly demonstrates the power dynamics that Typhoid Mary was designed to explore as a character. The mother character in this scene is older than Quincy, and at least for me, I expect the child to listen to the parent, even a grown child. I can appreciate Quincy not wanting to spy on his father for her, but he also blatantly says that his dad is cheating, and he is okay with it. And I won't say that his mom hitting him is the right thing to do, but I get why she does it. This is where you'd think that Quincy would be the one who is apologetic. He did something wrong. He is okay with his dad cheating on his mom. But no. He demands that she fix this insult to him. And she does. When he asks for equipment and money, she says she'll provide it, and in a very quiet, small text inside of her word balloons, as if she is the one being punished. Even when she has access to all of the space in their family house, money, and the power of a family hierarchy, Mother isn't in charge of this household. The men are. She has no power here. Typhoid, in contrast, is power in her scene. She can become whatever she needs to become in order to survive. The blushing girl next door, the seductive bad girl, or the murderous killer. Her telepathy allows her to read minds and influence thoughts, allowing her to paralyze and seduce that orderly with ease. Her telekinesis means that holding her is near impossible. She can break free with a thought, and with it she can improvise anything into a weapon. Even medical equipment. All of this is done in a very subtle, very show-don't-tell way of storytelling, which is why I opted to tell y'all some more background on Mary just for context. I've read this miniseries like 3 times in order to write these 2 episodes. I've reread Mary's Wikipedia page a couple of times, and I read a few other issues to just get a feel for the character, and this book is still a bit of a hard read for me. Nocenti's writing style definitely leaves me with questions more often than not, but it also definitely draws me in. I'm not complaining that the book doesn't answer enough questions. I'm saying that the book actively causes me to ask questions that I want answers to. It's fascinating. It pulls you in. We then move back to the red-tinted hotel room that we saw at the start of the comic. An overweight man is with a young woman, and he asks her to suck his gun. She demands extra for that service. He already got a freebie. Yeah, sure, he says. Just wipe that lipstick off first. He doesn't want that gunk on him. And then we cut to Mary, who is living her quiet life in suburbia. She has her boyfriend named John, who doesn't know that she has DID. He even mentions that Mary's roommate, Walker, doesn't seem to actively like him, indicating that Mary doesn't trust him with her past or personal information. This scene is interrupted by another scene in red. In that same room, a different woman gives orders to a man who is squatting on a chair with a leather mask over his face. When he finishes, he asks for a tissue to clean himself up, and she gives him permission to get one. She also tells him to sign his blasted credit card slip, Jack. Mary hears her neighbor, Gladys, sobbing outside and brings out Walker to comfort her. It turns out that her neighbor's daughter, Cynthia, has gone missing in New York City, and the police aren't investigating why. A woman named Flavia called Gladys and told her that her daughter was a fellow prostitute. She left her number with Gladys in case she wanted to learn more, but Gladys is just too torn up to actually use it. Her daughter's gone. What the rest of it matter? Walker asks if she can take Flavia's number, and she does call her. She sets up a meeting claiming to be a private investigator. Flavia is unsure about this meetup at first. She asks what Walker thinks she can do to help, and Typhoid is the one who answers. She's going to find the guy who killed Cynthia and kill him. In the red room again, another man and another woman are meeting. He promises to double her price if she does it, and she disagrees. She won't do that. He slaps her and tells her that she is going to do it, and she is going to like it. When she's done with this client, another person walks into the room. The prostitute seems surprised by this. She clearly wasn't expecting them. This intruder pulls out a gun. They put it in the woman's mouth, and they kill her. The contact, Flavia, agrees to meet with Walker. By the time Walker gets to the city, though, there's been another murder, a woman named Rachel, who we just saw killed. Flavia and Walker get to enter the murder scene, with Walker claiming to be a detective and Flavia her friend. An officer named Dodge orders them to be let in. This lets us hear that the cops find a black book of Rachel's clients, and one of them, the last one listed, is a police officer. We then cut to Uptown, where the officers involved assure the man that this whole thing is going to stay quiet. He is glad to hear it. Was the girl raped? He asked. What? You can't rape a prostitute, the officer assures the man. And the cops eventually leave. Bloody Mary arrives. She confronts the man, accusing him of killing one of her sisters. Terrified, he says that he didn't kill her. Yes, he visited her, sure, but she was alive the last time he saw her. This guy is the same person that we saw in the last Red Room cutaway. He is the one who slapped the prostitute, but he says he didn't kill her. We aren't shown what Bloody does to this guy, but blood does spatter across his office. What? She asks. Nothing to say? It's probably the missing teeth. And the way your jaw is hanging. And that's how our first issue ends. Bloody Mary lives up to her name, and all four of her personalities are on the case. As first issues go, I have to admit, it is super jarring to read. Nocenti uses a lot of fast-paced jump cuts between scenes, locales, time periods, even personalities in this case, so just following the story can be pretty challenging. Or at least it was challenging for me. Maybe you'll have an easier time of it. But the first issue does give us a very bare-bones basics on Mary, which does work well, and it presents a pretty interesting mystery overall. Given that Typhoid Mary was outright designed to comment on and explore women's sexuality, independence, and power, I think that she has been put in a really interesting position in this story. The murder of prostitutes isn't something that a lot of Marvel superheroes, who, let's face it, are typically largely male, touch upon at all. You generally won't read a lot of comics where the Avengers are avenging a dead prostitute, right? They've got bigger problems to deal with, is generally the remit. But for Typhoid, it feels like the perfect story. Defending, protecting, and avenging women is kind of her area of expertise and interest. At best, Typhoid is a vigilante, so again, investigating the street-level murder of outlaws feels like the right tone for this comic. And at worst, Typhoid/Bloody is a murderer herself, although she does generally kill to punish those who hurt others, which still feels like the right fit for this tone of story. Nocenti is paired with artist John Van Fleet for this miniseries, and that is a name that I am utterly unfamiliar with. Some quick Googling tells me that Van Fleet is perhaps best known in the comic book industry for his work over at DC on some Batman comics, where he worked with, get this, big surprise, and Nocenti. No wonder the pair reunited for Typhoid. They must have enjoyed working together. Looking at Van Fleet's artwork, him coming from Batman comics makes perfect sense to me. His artwork is heavy on the shadows and full blacks, using their presence to shape faces, bodies, and environments. Normally, when you're drawing, most people tend to draw the bright parts of a face first, and then you'll add in your shading second to give depth, life, and character. Van Fleet feels like he is drawing the shadowed stuff first to give shape to what light exists. Van Fleet doesn't really seem to pencil the comic book at all. He just uses heavy inks to kind of block in the figures, and then he uses colors to add more detail to them. It honestly looks like digital painting, but if that is the case in 1995, then he is one of the best digital painters that I've ever seen, especially for the era he would be working in. He stacks colors on his characters really well, although he does not use a wide spectrum of color for this particular comic. Van Fleet keeps everything a very quiet, very muted color tone for the entire miniseries. We got lots of browns, grays, faded blues or greens with jarring pops of red, especially when you cut to the scenes featuring the prostitutes in the hotel, where the only color present at all is red and black, murder and death, just nothing but. It's really effective, to be quite honest. Van Fleet's artwork is a great tonal match for the story, not just because it fits that dark, dirty, grimy street crime feel, but because it is as mysterious as the flipping murder itself. I had a lot of trouble telling anything apart from anything else while reading this comic. The characters are often only defined by a single piece of clothing that makes them stand out from any of the other characters in the scene. There are just masses of black shadows everywhere. Good luck telling the various prostitutes apart during the Red Room scenes, because holy crap, I cannot. As we move on in the story, we will see that there are 7 total deaths of prostitutes throughout this comic, and I couldn't tell you who any of them were in these individual scenes without going back and looking at the entire series and going, okay, this person murdered this character, so that character in that scene is this person, and working my way backwards through the whole narrative. It's not really frustrating. It was kind of a fun puzzle to put together, but I can see it being frustrating for certain people who don't care to do that amount of work. If I wasn't doing this for the podcast, I probably honestly wouldn't have spent that amount of time thinking about this comic. Despite how difficult I found navigating Van Fleet's artwork, I have to admit that my difficulty following his artistic presentation only made me invest in solving the mystery more. It was so hard to find clues that I actively worked harder to find them. It was only on my second read-through of this comic, as I was typing up the script for the first pass, that I started to figure out, oh, this scene has this character in it, which connects to this scene over there, which means this. Ah! So reading this comic has been one part escapism and one part confounding detective work, but I've enjoyed every second of it, to be quite honest. I honestly think that's part of why the Typhoid comic stuck with me and compelled me to cover the book on the show. I hadn't meant to to be quite honest. I just bought the miniseries on a whim at a dollar sale. I read it on a whim, and I had planned to just move on and read more comics on my little vacation. But the book kept rolling around in my head. And I think that it is because Nocenti and Van Fleet make a truly compelling story and told it in the most confusing way possible, which kept me engaged with it even after the fact. All that said, let's get into the next issue. So the cop who let Walker and Flavia into the murder scene, that was Detective Claire Dodge. While we barely get to see her here at the end of the first issue, the introduction to her brings in the last of our main cast members, Detectives Dodge and Detective Richards. Marvel Wiki tells me that Richards' first name is Dick, but I do not think that's true. He is only ever referred to as Richards within the comic, save for one scene, and we are about to cover what goes down there. After establishing that Typhoid is now posing as a prostitute in order to hunt for the murderer, who is being referred to as the West Side Ripper, we get a fairly long scene with these two detective partners at the start of issue 2. Detective Richards is your classic crooked cop. When he walks the streets, he doesn't see human beings who need help and protection. He sees freaks, criminals, and things to be used. Everyone has a payoff for him or a perk for him being a cop and not arresting them. Richards is also a bit of a misogynist. He jokes with one of his contacts, Jose, about bringing his mistress to dinner but not his wife. When Jose jokes about the prostitute killer being a woman, he also jokes that the local prostitutes might be men. And Richards just laughs along with him. As a small character note, Richards also sucks on a lollipop. It's such a small detail that when someone points it out later in the comic, it honestly threw me. I was like, no, it doesn't. But looking for it, yeah, he generally does either have a lollipop stick poking out of his mouth, or he's got like the sucker in his hand as he's like waving his hand around. Van Fleet's artwork is dark enough that it can be incredibly hard to spot in some scenes, but I found it 90% of the time when I was looking for it, so that is a nice commitment to a detail that could easily have gone missing. Detective Dodge, on the other hand, is the new rookie, full of hope and optimism. People need help, and police officers, well, it's their job to help those people. There is a killer amongst them murdering women, and they need to catch that person and stop them as soon as possible. Richards points out that Dodge's heart is in the right place, but that's just not how life on the streets works. Nobody's going to talk to her goody-goody namby-pamby two-shoes, but the whole time that they've been walking the streets, people have been telling him everything, he says. Case in point, the pair walk up to a small group of prostitutes, which include Typhoid. During Typhoid's opening scene, which actually preceded the scene with the detectives, Nocenti establishes that the prostitutes know that their lives are in danger with the so-called Ripper on the loose. But for them, that's also just part of the job. They are always at risk. While none of them like that aspect of the job, it is a fairly standard risk that they have to run in this line of work. One of them, a woman named Tulip, gives Typhoid advice on the job, and she does listen carefully. A client, nicknamed Baby, walks by, and one of the girls volunteers to take him. Dodge and Richards then approach the prostitutes. Tulip recognizes Richards instantly, and she knows what's about to go down. She warns Typhoid not to call Richards Dick. He hates that. This is clearly where the first name confusion comes into play, but like I said, I do not think that his first name is Dick. It is clearly meant to be an insult based on his last name, Richards, and the fact that he is a dick in personality, and of course, they're going to say that he's got a small dick in reality, too. Richards lets Dodge take the lead on questioning the prostitutes, and of course, no one tells her anything. She gives Typhoid her card in case anyone changes their mind and wants to talk to her later, and Richards takes note of the new girl. "You're new," he says. She smiles. "Sure am, Dick." Tulip's face lights up, and you can see Dodge tense. Richard yells at Typhoid, "Don't ever call me that!" "Why not?" Typhoid asks. "They all call you that. It's like Richards, isn't it, but shorter. Like smaller?" Richard steps aside with Dodge. They confirm with another uniformed cop on the new girl. Nobody knows anything about her. Richards jokes that he would really like to get to know her better. Maybe perform a strip search and do a skull job. The uniform officer laughs nervously, clearly uncomfortable, joking with Detective Dodge standing right there too. Richards isn't nervous. She's his equal, isn't she? And if Dodge wants his respect, she can't really argue that. A scene with Quincy interrupts this. He has his set all ready for Mary, he just needs his star. His mother is lounging in the strap-laden medical chair that waits for Mary, and this upsets Quincy. They argue about her being on his set, about her shopping as a way of coping with her husband's dalliances, too. Dad actually comes home in this scene, and he is happy to see that Quincy's video game store instead of college education is paying off. What was the name of his last film? Dad asks. Quincy's last film was called A Girl and Her Gun. All of the prostitutes murdered were shot by a gun held in their mouths. Quincy just made the suspect list. Back at Typhoid, Richards pushes her into an alley. She needs to learn how things work around here. He lets her work when he doesn't arrest her. So now she has to pay him for that privilege, either in cash or in flesh. All the girls know to do this. This is just how it works. Typhoid holds her ground, though. He calls this working? Really? Isn't there a killer sticking guns in women's mouths that he should be finding instead of harassing her? Those aren't women, Richard says. They're hookers. Killing hookers has been an age-old practice. They've been doing it since the beginning. Why mess with it now? Now pay up. Richards leans over her, putting a hand against the brick wall. You know, that's the best part of having a serial killer on the loose, he says. He can stick a gun in her mouth if she doesn't work with him, and nobody would ever suspect him. Trash in the alley surrounding them starts to float, lifted telekinetically. Typhoid shoves the man back, then kicks him in the head. She grabs his gun and wraps an arm around his throat. Did he kill those girls? Richard chokes that he would never even touch any of them. But that's not what Typhoid asked, is it? Did he put a gun in their mouth and kill them? You don't know, do you? You aren't sure. Typhoid shoves him to the ground. Richards eggs her on, shouting for her to do it. Come on! But Typhoid won't. Richards doesn't want it bad enough. Instead, she leaves him with something to think about. She forces his gun into his mouth, and then she wraps wire around his head, securing it into place. She leaves him in the alley, his own gun tied into his mouth. Typhoid walks away, sucking on his lollipop. Cherry. Back in suburbia, Trent has found the home of Mary Walker. He notes the 4 sets of laundry left on the line, different clothes highlighting the different personalities that she contains. He's amazed. She really is the perfect movie star. Sobbing catches his attention, and he notices Gladys. In New York, Walker comes to in the small hotel apartment that they are living in at the moment, and I believe it's the same apartment that Rachel was murdered in. That or Typhoid stole the tissue dispenser that is shaped like a doll's head that was in that room and present through all of the scenes. There are small notes taped to the walls, communications from her alters. This disturbs her, as she didn't realize that they were getting involved with this. But when she finds Bloody's gun in her suitcase, she freezes. The notes indicate that they have found a common name in the black books of all the murdered girls, a Copt nicknamed Race. But if only one of her alters has this information, then they might not have enough information to know whether Race is innocent or not. If Bloody does her thing, she might kill him needlessly. My God. Walker appreciates the irony of this particular job. There are 4 detectives solving one case, but they might not be able to do it if they can't work together. In suburbia, Trent has been waiting at Mary's place. We learn that he too has spent time in psychiatric care. He has scars all up and down his arms from cutting, which are normally covered by long-sleeve shirts. For him, he just felt nothing, except for the pain. Eventually, the pain became pleasure, and he thinks that Mary works the same way. Mary's boyfriend, John, arrives home, and Trent pretends to be an old friend to Mary from the hospital. He claims that she might be in trouble, but John doesn't believe it at first. No, she's on vacation in the city. She's not in trouble at all. Look, she's been sending me postcards, he says. And she has. Postcards covered in blood. It's not blood, John argues. That's paint. Mary's a painter. It's red paint, man. Trent examines the cards. Did Mary ever, seem to read your mind? Did objects occasionally, move around her? And yeah, John does recognize those signs. Buddy, you're going to want to sit down for this news, Trent says. In the city, Typhoid has finished a session with a client. He is impressed with her. She was so sweet, so gentle at first. A sign of the altar Mary. And then she turned into an animal. Yowza! He could have sworn he saw objects floating while they were doing it. A sign that Typhoid had taken over and lost control of her telekinesis while they were having sex. He then asks her for something a little bit more. That she suck his gun. Typhoid immediately changes. Her mess of red hair piles on top of her head, and she telekinetically grabs his gun. Using her powers, not even physically touching this guy, Bloody Mary holds him down and beats him. She sees flashes of memories in her mind. One of Richards with his gun in his mouth. Another one, but of her, younger, and a revolver in hers. And then another one of her, but older this time, still with the gun in her mouth. Bloody holds this guy against the wall. She slides his own gun into his mouth as he begs, trying to speak around the weapon. You want words? Bloody asks. You demand eloquence? I have only one sleek, brassy word for you. Not even a word, not really. Just a sound. The last sound she ever heard, Bloody says, referencing the prostitute that she believes this man killed. Bang. Bang, bang, bang. This issue is where things start to get interesting. Nocenti spent most of the first issue establishing Mary Walker as a former psychiatric patient, as someone with DID, as someone who was investigating a murder, become a string of murders, actually, and as a potential movie star. She was putting all of the pieces on the board, so to speak. A fitting move for a first issue. That's normally what you do. You have to set everything up. The second issue has now finished introducing our main cast, which is now revealed to be a cast of suspects. Quincy has become one of those suspects, having made a movie called A Girl and Her Gun. He doesn't really feel like a dangerous murderer. Quincy honestly feels more like a spoiled, petulant child. But, that's part of the danger, isn't it? Murderers don't exactly look like murderers all of the time. And I could see an artistic visionary producing snuff films. Especially if his motive is to explore what makes a killer kill. Maybe he wants an answer for his own actions because he doesn't know why he does what he does. We also know that he has access to resources, as his parents' money pays for his movie sets. His room is decorated in expensive movie props, posters, and statues. And he was able to get his hand on Mary Walker's psychiatric file. This guy has resources, he has access to places that most people don't, and he's got a motive. I would also add that Trent makes for a potential murderer as well. He stated this issue that he takes pleasure from pain, and maybe that extends to the pain of others. He is shown to be quite charming, able to make fast friends with Gladys and John when he first meets them. Additionally, when Quincy said that Trent should be the one who finds Mary, he adds that his friend seems to be able to seduce anyone. So again, he can get close to people really easily. He also phone hacks his way into more psychiatric files, looking for Mary's current address, and God, phone hacking is not a thing that I've had to think about for a long time. Not that I've ever engaged in it. I've listened to a geez, a Radiolab episode on phone hacking. If you don't know what phone hacking is, it is literally hacking phone lines to get free phone calls by using whistles and tones to psych out the phone company. It's fascinating stuff. It's exactly the kind of weird niche stuff that I could see nerds and geeks getting into that nobody else cares about. I highly suggest, if you haven't done any research on it, look into phone hacking. It's fascinating, but I'm not going to get into it here because that's a thing in and of itself. The point is that Trent is smart, he is driven, and he was able to find Mary's address once. Clearly, he could cover his tracks if he was a killer. And then we have Detective Richards. He is openly disrespectful towards the prostitutes and, pretty much anybody else that he runs into. We know that he abuses his power, using it to get sexual favors, gifts, or money from the citizens that he is sworn and paid to protect. When he and Dodge are approaching the women, the prostitutes describe him as Columbo but stupid. He sucks on those lollipops because he thinks that it makes him look innocent, when in actuality it makes him look pretty creepy. Richards feels like the most obvious suspect in the comic at this point, which, in classic Scooby-Doo style, makes him the least suspicious character in the world to me. He is dangerous, sure, don't get me wrong, and he is an absolute creep, but I don't think at this point that he is the murderer. I think he's a red herring. One of my favorite things about this issue, though, is how Typhoid continues to flip the script on everyone that she meets. When she's standing on a street corner in her leather panties, straps, and a small top, she looks pretty harmless. But the second that Richards tries to put her under his thumb, she slowly builds back up to a point of dominance, where she is not listening to him, he has to listen to her. We see those objects in the alley floating behind Richards before she even does anything to this guy. That's really creepy, and I love it. And then, when she's walking away, sucking on his lollipop, I do think it's the perfect way to demonstrate how little she fears him. I don't think that I would ever finish someone else's lollipop after it has been in their mouth. It just grosses me out. Like, even my wife, if she was like, hey, you want to finish this? I don't think I would. But Typhoid plays by her own rules. She doesn't care about what's proper or potential germs. She just wanted to rub her lack of fear and her power in Richards' face, and I absolutely love that. But when Typhoid is with the other prostitutes, it feels like she's always been there. Nocenti doesn't really do any work to make these women feel like the heroes of their own narratives. No one says that they're doing this to, put their kid through college or pay for their mother's cancer operation or anything altruistic like that. They are sex workers. It's a job. And there is no moral judgment coming from the author about it. She instead uses the cast to comment on the job, leaving how you, as an audience member, feel about it up to you. The closest we come to a moral judgment is that these women who are being killed are people who are being killed, and they should have justice done for them, even if their job does make them outlaws, which is one of those things that I had honestly never thought about, because it's not like I sit around thinking about prostitution all the time, but I never thought about the idea that prostitution technically makes you an outlaw. Wow. Van Fleet does do a sneaky bit of meta-commentary within the artwork of this issue, though. During the scenes with Typhoid and her new friends, there is a lot of signage behind them that just says, meat. You get the occasional good old XXX. To the clients who hire these women, that is exactly what they are. Meat. A product to be bought. We see this echoed in Richards' opinion of them, as he sees the women as less than human. If someone is killing them, as far as he's concerned, that's a risk of the job that they've taken on, and why should he be the one to fix it? There is also the moment when Richards pushes Typhoid into the alley. When she hits against the brick wall, there is an open eye graffitied on the wall behind her, almost like the Sheikah eye for my Zelda fans. I bring this up because there have been other moments when Mary is shown before an eye, like in issue 1 when Walker gives way to Mary for the phone call with John. Towards the end of the issue, when Walker calls Flavia and then turns into Typhoid at the end of the call, we see like a corona of darkness around her head. So I think that this eye flourish is meant to indicate a shift in Mary's alters, which is a fascinating storytelling tactic. It isn't consistent with every time that she shifts, and I don't think that we actually see it in the next 2 issues at all. But it is clearly meant to be a thing here. Van Fleet definitely does it intentionally. I wish that it was a consistent storytelling tick, because it would really help me navigate Van Fleet's artwork and Nocenti's subtle, if not lacking, storytelling. This issue also really brings Van Fleet's artwork up a level for me. He puts a lot of work into Richards' face and acting. Clearly, he is meant to be one of our leading suspects, so making sure to get his cocky jerk smile and his sneer across us is a big priority for the comic. We, as an audience, are supposed to dislike him as much as Mary does, and I think that Van Fleet does a very good job of getting that point across. The only real complaint that I have with this issue is the stuff with Trent, and not because it's bad. I actually like Nocenti establishing that Trent has his own mental issues, which makes him feel connected to Mary in a way that the other cast members in this book just can't. He brought this up a little bit in issue 1, demanding that Mary be treated with respect, so having it expanded on here a little bit more is actually great. But when Trent meets Gladys, she's still crying. But now she is crying because a girl on her soap opera died while she was pregnant. It almost feels like Nocenti is trying to say that Gladys never had a daughter, and that the mission that Typhoid is on in New York is a fallacy, a misunderstanding because of Gladys's emotional investment in the story. Like maybe Cynthia never existed, Gladys just overly connected with somebody on TV, and that somebody on TV got murdered, and then Typhoid is off on this random mission, and she happens to stumble into the actual murder of actual prostitutes. But that just can't be what happened here. We've got people like Flavia, who knew Cynthia, who met her and worked with her, and Flavia is the one who called Gladys. Nocenti and Van Fleet only spend a few panels with Trent and Gladys within the comic total, but it just feels completely out of place regarding Gladys's role in this story as the one who sends Mary off on this quest. I suppose that it does demonstrate how quick on his feet Trent is. He had Gladys trusting him with information about Mary within minutes of meeting her, but otherwise, this whole bit with Gladys just feels really weird to me and completely jarring to the rest of the narrative. Additionally, I don't like the scene between Trent and John simply because Trent is the one who tells John the truth about Mary, that she has DID, when Mary very clearly kept that from him. I'm not saying that hiding that information was the right thing to do in a relationship, but Trent telling John takes that agency away from Mary. And even worse, there is no follow-up to the fact that he does this in the story at all. Was John upset that Mary didn't trust him with such information? Was he scared? Did he want to know more? I don't know. And the story is so focused on Mary Walker's narrative, as it rightfully should be, it's her comic, that we never get to see the fallout of this. Honestly, it would have been simpler and just made more sense if Trent used Gladys to confirm that Mary was out of town, and then Trent simply found one of her postcards in the mailbox and then used that to track her back to New York. It would have saved us the whole trouble with John and just cleaned up the narrative and made it that little bit much more smoother. Although, given how confusing the rest of the narrative is, maybe Nocenti doesn't want a smooth narrative. I don't know. Next time, Walker tries to ally with Detective Dodge to set up a sting, but Trent gets in the way. How many more people have to die before the West Side Ripper is caught? Can they overcome a massive police cover-up to bring the killer to justice? Or do they only have one piece of the puzzle? Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 23.2 of Typhoid. Why do killers kill? If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.